Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. Shadowlands is way too hype and cannot come soon enough. But while we're waiting for Shadowlands, one of the best announcements of Shadowlands is the fact that Blizzard is going to be unpruning some of our classes. The work on Shadowlands is going to be mostly class-oriented than spec-oriented, so most of your specs are going to end up playing the same way. However, certain key class abilities and spec abilities are going to be coming back to the game. I want to highlight some of the most exciting ones out of the announcements we have on Shadowlands so far. Let's do this alphabetically in an order, because just about one of every class has something exciting to bring to the table. First one for me, in person, is going to be the Death Knight. This is a personal favorite of mine compared to the way the Death Knight has evolved and how they ended up in the end of BFA. Auto attack damage as well as pet damage is huge in Battle for Azeroth, which allows someone like an Elemental Shaman to justify dropping an Elemental as part of the burst cooldown in a way, since these powerful allies that we summon or raise from the dead, in the Death Knight's case, are going to be quite powerful. And they're bringing back the Gargoyle. Already the Unholy Death Knight specializes in summoning armies and armies of undead, but now you will have a baseline Gargoyle that will watch over you, sniping enemies with unholy magic, I would presume. The one thing I would want for Shadowlands and the Gargoyle is to maybe update the model for the Gargoyle. We use one of the new Shadowlands models and modify it so the Gargoyle essentially does exactly the same thing, just looks slightly different. When I started playing World of Warcraft, the first class that I've ever played was a Druid. I think a lot of us found ourselves drawn to Night Elf Druids for one reason or another, but one of the cooler abilities that I remember having as a Druid back in Cataclysm, which is the expansion when I started playing, was Cyclone. Cyclone has gone through a lot of changes. At one point, it was available for all specs for any part of the game. Then it became exclusive to only a few other specs. Then it became an honored talent that's only usable in PvP. Now, no one is going to argue that Cyclone was some crazy ability that you could use in dungeons or raids for Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, but it definitely does have some unique uses currently in BFA and hopefully going into Shadowlands. Cyclone is making a comeback for all the Druids, and even though I would want to see Cyclone on my bards for the nostalgia's sake, there are actually some uses that you could have for Cyclone. Not only would it allow a Druid to crowd control two targets at once, like a root on one enemy and Cyclone spammable on the other, but in Mythic Plus Dungeons, for example, this would be a great ability to use on an enemy that's going to have a heal over time effect on them. You could Cyclone the enemy, making them invulnerable for a limited amount of time, but if you don't have a class to dispel a heal, that could be used in order to deal with an enemy's self-heal capability. Plus, it's an extra crowd control to throw in for the Druid. Now, if they can only make Cyclone instant cast for Ferals, and then we'll have the Druid back to its former glory. I've always thought that certain classes in the game have a little bit of a bland rotation. Take Arms Warrior for example, and Arms is my go-to choice of what spec of DPS I currently want to play when it comes to my Warrior. I know everybody loves Fury, but something about Arms has drawn me to it. Now, Arms Warrior is pretty bland, it has a couple cool abilities, but overall they don't feel super hyper effective, up until the enemy gets super low on health. And then the execute mechanic comes in, giving you that extra 4th or 5th or 6th button to press into your rotation. And I think this is where part of the fun of the gameplay can be, for certain classes to have an extra button to press, even if it's just an execute. So, in this video in particular, I am going to be highlighting some of my favorite executes coming back to the game. The first one is going to be Kill Shot for Hunter. Now, Kill Shot has always been an ability for Hunters as far as I remember, but I didn't used to play back in vanilla, so I am limited, but Kill Shot to be added to all the specs in the game right now would feel so good. Beast Mastery, Marksman, and even Survival all have fairly simplistic rotations. I would say they're effective, but still, the simplicity sometimes can be kind of boring. And trust me, this is why I don't really play Assassination that much. It's a good spec, it's reliable, but the rotation is simplistic, because it comes down to just spam and mutilate the whole time. I would love to talent into Blindside, previously known as the Dispatch, and have that execute potential with my Assassination Rogue and extra ability to press when it comes to getting the enemy lower in health. Although I wouldn't want an ability to replace my main common point builder, but rather something to add into my rotation, maybe on cooldown, so I feel like Kill Shot could have that fun potential. Mage has got some of the weirdest rework when it comes to Shadowlands, but I'm personally a fan of. So this, in a sense, is going to be 3 abilities in one. Although for this video, I do count this as one single type of change to spells rather than a specific spell coming back. The fact that you have your Arcane Mage, Frost Mage, and Fire Mage not sharing a lot of spells between one another is a little silly. Certain spells that do share, like Frost Nova for example, as well as Spell Steal, which are taken from the Frost tree and the Arcane tree. But in the past, mages used to have a lot more. So this isn't really new abilities or old school abilities coming back, but rather allowing mages to swap around with different abilities. So all three mages are going to have access to Arcane Explosion, a great instant cast AoE ability that costs quite a bit of mana, but can be quite effective when dealing burst AoE damage to enemies that are almost dead, and also finding rogues in stealth. Fire Blast, which is an instacast ability, and I wonder if they'll make it off of GCD for other specs as well, or maybe not, in order to make it less of a reliability when it comes to your rotation, which would feel a little silly. But to be able to sizzle an enemy with an instacast ability to just finish him off, or maybe hit one of those mobs that don't have a lot of health to begin with, would make it nicer for Frost Mage instead of just always casting spells. Same thing goes for Frostbolt. Now each spec has a way to deal with slows. For example, Fire Mage has mobility with Scorch, Arcane has a lot of blinks and a ability of slow that doesn't actually have any damage modifiers coming with it, but still, Frostbolt is going to be coming back to all mage specs in case you want an ability to cycle in between your casts to maintain a slow on an enemy. Overall, these changes are going to make mages a lot better to play when it comes to leveling alone, and those changes to leveling I feel like could translate pretty well into some endgame content. When I play on my Retribution Paladin, there is a whole talent row that deals with how you generate resources. And there's only one fun talent in that row, but let me go over the tree. In the left row, we have a talent that makes a Crusader Strike a slightly shorter cooldown and has a chance to make your finishers cost one less holy power, which isn't super fun, isn't super engaging, kind of an RNG based ability. Second one is going to be even more RNG, just a chance for your Blade of Justice to reset, and it does slightly more damage, which is cool, but the one that I prefer the most is Hammer of Wrath. And also being a finisher, it is an ability that you are able to use, it's an ability you're able to press, and it has a specific role for the end game damage, but also combos together with Wings. Whether Blizzard is going to allow Holy and Prot, who will be getting Hammer of Wrath back, to combo it together with Wings to use it as an extra burst ability doesn't really matter to me as much. The fact that the class will have a little bit more finishing power, I feel like is going to be super fun. Imagine being a healer inside of a dungeon, helping the DPS do as much damage as possible. You see mobs as well as bosses dropping low, and there goes this ability that shines and brightens up and says, hey, you are able to use me at will, since this enemy is low on health. Now you have something extra to swing at your foe, whether it's a boss or a dungeon mob. Not only would Hammer Wrath be an effective way for Retribution Paladins to always maintain an extra way to generate guaranteed amount of holy power, but also give Protection Paladins and Holy Paladins something extra to do when it comes to Blizzard, giving Paladins a little bit more damage. In the same breath, Shadow Ward Death is an ability that has been iconic to Priest as far as I remember. Even currently in BFA, if you were to go for Shadow Ward Death, even though it's not the most effective talent as of right now, it's a lot of fun to play with, and early in BFA, it was a way for you to continue the insanity mechanic to give you a little bit extra kick of insanity as you are dipping low. And the idea is to try to balance using this ability when the enemy is getting low in order to extend your insanity, but you also have 2 charges, so you could use 2 charges back to back in order to maintain your insanity. The weaker the enemy is, the stronger you get, and the longer you stay in insanity, the more damage you do, the more you overpower the enemy. And that fun playstyle can also be translated for Shadow as well as Disc and Holy. If they bring in the original Shadow Ward Death, where the ability can be used on enemies that are not at execute range, then Discipline Priest and Shadow Priest will have a guaranteed way again to get out of CC. Now currently Discipline Priest already has a way to do it with the on a talent of Premonition, but Shadow Ward Death was always more fun to use either way. It has this instacast element, does a little bit of damage, and allows Priest to have a little bit of extra output in power. Rogues and Poisons, and or Shiv are 2 good options. Out of those 2, I have to go with Poisons, simply because of just how effective and powerful Poisons are going to be, no matter which spec or rogue you play. Right now, Assassination, I would bet, is probably the most effective spec in many of you guys' eyes when it comes to single target damage on bosses, utility, or PvP viability. primarily from poisons. You have constant slows that you're able to apply on enemies. You have nature damage that goes through armor, but also through cloth, and you have wound poison to prevent healing. Now, that alone can make the spec very powerful, but if you were to give wound poison to Outlaw or Subtlety, off the bat, those specs would be so much better for PvP. If you were to give Crippling Poison back to Subtlety, no longer would you have to deal with a 30% slow, but rather a full-blown 50% slow, as long as your weapons are able to proc it. Sub-rogues will also have more guaranteed damage on bosses with extra nature, since they have daggers. Daggers hit the bosses a lot more often, lots more chances for you to apply poisons on your enemy. I feel poisons would bring a lot of utility to the spec, especially if they bring a variety of them, from crippling to mind numbing to wound poison, deadly, instant poison, and maybe even more poisons that we used to have in the past. Primal Strike is not one of those abilities that a lot of people remember all that fondly, but I do. I played in Cataclysm when Primal Strike was one of the first abilities you learned as a shaman. You would learn Lightning Bolt, you would learn your self-heal, as well as Primal Strike in order to be able to whack the enemy. In Classic World of Warcraft, shamans actually do quite a bit of melee damage, as it's part of their mechanic, but only enhancement shamans right now are using any form of Primal Strike, which eventually now turns into Storm Strike. But what if Primal Strike were added for a healer or a elemental shaman? What if you could actually get up in melee and whack the boss, whack a mob, or maybe hit that rogue that's super low on health that's trying to get away from your enemy team? I think something like this could be a lot of fun to experiment with, and maybe Blizzard could take certain abilities that Enhancement Shaman might have that are technically a melee ability that could be modified and given to Elemental or Restoration. I think something like that could be very fun, which is why I'm personally excited about Primal Strike and what it could potentially offer. Not the ability itself, although it could be pretty wacky, but what it could mean for the future of shamans. I mean, ask yourself, is there a possibility that a shaman could embrace more of a primal wild side and have certain melee abilities that shatter your enemy? Even though this is one of my more preferred classes in the game right now in BFA, it is the slowest caster I've ever played, and that is a Warlock. One of the issues that I've had with Warlock is how much I feel like you have to stand still and just turret the damage. And I used to complain about it a lot until you get used to it. But I mean, once I got used to it, it felt pretty good, but it definitely was a bit jarring because just about every class for a limited amount of time in the game had ability to move and cast or have so many instant casts so you can shuffle around while reapplying dots or reapplying effects to enemies. So I'm super happy that Blizzard is giving Warlock's ability of Demonic Circle. I know it's not the craziest ability ever. It is not some earth-shattering, cataclysmic ability that will obliterate your enemies into smithereens. It is a simple ability for Warlocks to be able to get back from Destination A to Destination B in a moment's notice. But I always felt like it was part of the playstyle. It had a little bit of guile to it to be able to disappear from the enemy's side and reappear somewhere else at a portal. I always thought it was a fun mechanic, and when monks were introduced with the same basic ability to teleport to a location, I thought that was completely ripped off. Seeing Warlocks be able to chain into port, into a gateway, into CC to follow up is going to be super fun in Shadowlands. If Blizzard is willing to give Warlocks Summoning Circle back as a baseline ability, I mean, it makes you wonder what other abilities that are in your towns right now that could maybe be given to Warlock specs or classes as a baseline toolkit. You know how many times I've seen a warrior square off in a 5v5 1v1 duel against no other than a paladin? Almost always there's just about nothing a warrior can do against a paladin. Their damage is actually quite equal. Hell, a warrior sometimes can do more damage than a paladin and overpower him. But there's two things that keep a paladin ahead of a warrior at all times. One of them would be healing. Now, Fury Warriors can heal just as well as a paladin sometimes, but when it comes to arms, there's not even a snowball's chance. The second thing that keeps the paladin at an advantage are bubble or blessing of protection. Just how rage-filled would you be as a warrior after slamming down the paladin, obliterating his kneecaps, using all your might to shatter his defenses, and then a bubble comes out of nowhere. He stands in that bubble for 6 seconds, casting Flash of Light all the way to full health. Now, there used to be an ability back in the day called Shattering Throw that shattered the hopes and dreams of every red paladin that a warrior had in his toolkit. I mean, do I need to give you any more examples why I'm excited about Shattering Throw coming back in the game? Just think of paladins in their bubbles and mages in their ice blocks, all nice and comfy behind all those powerful defenses. And you are a lowly warrior just waiting to break those walls in Shadowlands. Now the last ability on this list is not going to be a class ability. I think the last ability we're going to do a special mention for Eyes of the Beast. If you've never played Hunter back in the day, or have never seen what Eyes of the Beast looks like, hop on your priest right now, find a bunch of NPC mobs, and go mind control a beast, whether it's a spider, a raptor, a wolf, or whatever, and use the mind controlled animal to attack your enemies. That's basically what Eyes of the Beast does. It's a nice, flavorful ability that allows for a hunter and their pet to form a special bond to the point where the hunter is able to see through their pet's eyes and able to dictate them and run them everywhere. Hell, back in the day, it had a little bit of a charming effect where new players that didn't know what the hell was going on thought that the beast was actually a random NPC attacking them, begin attacking it, and if they were under level, you could use that beast in order to obliterate a bunch of newbies who had no idea what's going on. It's a very small, very simple, charming ability that didn't have any gameplay possibilities. It wasn't something that was really used in raids or dungeons for some crazy, amazing pulls, and wasn't really ever the playmaker. It's a simple ability that was just a nice little flavor thing that hunters used to have. If Blizzard is able to add more flavor abilities like this, like Eyes of the Beast, that is going to do nothing for the hunter in terms of increasing their damage output, increasing their efficiency, allowing them to bypass certain dungeon mechanics, just a fun ability to play with, I wonder what other abilities Blizzard could maybe bring back into the game. So I guess this last special is partially because of the ability, because I always found it super cool and super unique, but also for the possibilities of what other simple, maybe even somewhat useless gameplay-wise abilities Blizzard could bring back to Shadowlands. Now in this video, there's two classes that completely omitted. First one is going to be a monk. Blizzard said they're going to be doing more things for a monk when it comes to it, trying to figure out what abilities to bring back. If you are a long-time player or a monk main, then you might have a few abilities in mind of what you think they should bring back to the game as a class ability for monks. Monks still are a fairly new-ish class. They're not quite as ancient as a Death Knight. They're not quite as new as a Demon Hunter, but they've only had a separate amount of abilities that they used to have at one point or another in only 3-4 expansions. So they're still a work in progress. I think Blizzard still needs some time to figure out what they might need. If you're a monk main, what ability do you think they should bring back? Last class on the list was of course Demon Hunter. They've only been around for Legion and Battle for Azeroth. And even Demon Hunter might have an ability or two they used to have back in Legion that I just can't think of right now. But Demon Hunters also came around the time we had artifact weapons, so most of those abilities that people might think of a cool passive or a good active ability could be related to the artifact weapon ability as well. They're pretty bare bones. I don't know what else they could give to Demon Hunters. I think they have a pretty good class to start building up on them and give them more mechanics, but nothing that really they used to have. But what mechanics that are new or exciting that you think Demon Hunters should get in the next expansion? Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, what you think about all the different abilities the Blizzard is bringing to Shadowlands. This is just a very first few list of abilities that we have right now that I found most exciting, but there's probably going to be more. What Blizzard stated that they want to do for Shadowlands is not really change the specs and how they play, although some specs needs buffs and others need complete reworks. Blizzard said they want to focus on class-based abilities, something that your class brings, whether you're a healer, tank, or DPS, something that your class should bring to the team that might be helpful. I think this focus on class will be good for this expansion, as Blizzard did a lot of focus on specs in Battle for Azeroth. I would even say that certain specs in game right now play fine, but there's one or two abilities are missing, maybe from Legion, maybe from Pandaria, maybe from Wrath of Lich King, or even BC, that would nail the playstyle by itself. So let's hope for the best when it comes to Shadowlands. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see all of you in the next one.